The rain came down hard that October night in Greystone Falls, Oregon. Not the soft Pacific mist that most people in this part of the country learn to live with, the kind that settled on your shoulders like a second skin and didn't ask much of you. This was different. This was the kind of rain that had weight to it, that hit the pavement with intention, that ran off the eaves of houses in thick silver curtains, and pooled in the cracks of old sidewalks, and made the whole town smell like cold iron and wet pine, and something older than both. Inside the house on Canfield Street, Calla Voss stood in the hallway with her back against the wall. 17 years old, 5'4", a canvas backpack at her feet that wasn't heavy because there wasn't much left that was hers. Dark eyes that had learned over the past few years to take in a room before reacting to it. A face that people sometimes described as serious, though the truth was closer to careful. She had learned careful the way most people learn it, the hard way, one disappointment at a time. Her mother, Lorene, stood at the kitchen sink with her back turned. The faucet was running. The dishes weren't moving. Her hands rested on the edge of the counter like she was holding herself in place against something she didn't have the strength to face directly. She didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. The water just kept running, and the dishes just kept not moving, and Lorene Voss stood there between the two of them like a woman who had already made her choice and was waiting for the consequences to finish arriving. Raymond Holt stood between Calla and the front door. He was 51 years old, lean and tall, wearing a pressed shirt. Even at this hour, a man who believed that appearance was a form of control and had lived his entire adult life inside that belief. His eyes were the color of cold water over flat stone. Not angry, not cruel exactly. Something more precise than cruel. The eyes of a man who had long since moved past the point where he needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted. He looked at Calla the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved and is simply waiting to file away. "I've said what I have to say," he told her. "You've got 5 minutes." She didn't answer him. He glanced at his watch. The gesture was practiced, deliberate, designed to communicate that her presence in this hallway was a minor inconvenience in a well-organized evening rather than the moment that it actually was. After 5 minutes, he said, "I call the sheriff and tell him there's a runaway in my house." A runaway. She turned the word over in her mind the way you turn a stone over to see what lives underneath it. She wasn't running from anything. She was being removed. There was a difference. She understood it even if he was choosing not to. She bent down and picked up the backpack. It wasn't heavy. 3 shirts, a hoodie she'd owned for 2 years worn soft at the cuffs, 1 pair of jeans rolled tight, a toothbrush, the phone she'd bought herself with money saved from 2 summers of waitressing currently sitting at 14% battery, a paperback her father had given her when she was 7, the cover bent and the spine cracked from being read too many times, and the photograph. She never went anywhere without the photograph. It was folded twice, tucked into the front pocket of her jeans against the small of her hip. 8 years old now, the photograph. In it, her father was kneeling beside a workbench in their old garage, his hand resting on her shoulder, his eyes squinting against the afternoon sun that was coming in through the open bay door. She was 9 years old in that picture. She was wearing a denim jacket that was 2 sizes too big because it had belonged to him, and she had asked to wear it, and he had said yes without hesitating the way he always said yes to things that cost him nothing but mattered to her. They were both smiling. The world in that photograph was a place where things like this did not happen. The world had not been that place for a long time. She slung the backpack over one shoulder and walked toward the door. Her mother's back didn't move. Calla stopped. She didn't mean to. Her feet just did it. Stopped her in the kitchen doorway with one hand on the frame and the word already forming in her throat before she decided to let it out. "Mom." It came out quieter than she intended. Smaller. It was the last word she had, the one she'd been saving. Lorene's shoulders rose, once slow, like a woman taking a breath to speak. Then they fell again. The water kept running. The dishes didn't move. Raymond opened the front door for her. Not dramatically, not with any particular satisfaction in his face. Just opened it the way a man opens a door for someone who is leaving, smooth and final, and completely without heat. "You'll thank me one day," he said. Calla walked past him into the rain. The door closed behind her. Not slammed, closed, with the soft, certain click of a man who understood that the loudest exits were for people who weren't sure they had won. She stood on the porch for half a second, just long enough to feel the temperature fall against her face, just long enough for the rain to find the back of her neck and the gap between her collar and her skin and start its work. Then she walked down the porch steps and onto the sidewalk and turned south and kept moving. She did not look back. She had a feeling that if she looked back, something in her would decide that humiliation was preferable to the unknown, and she could not afford that decision. Not tonight, not with $9 in her front pocket and 14% battery and nowhere in the world that was waiting for her. Canfield Street ran south toward the railroad tracks, and the railroad tracks ran toward the part of Greystone Falls that the town's Chamber of Commerce photographs were careful not to include. The old industrial corridor, the lumber mill that had shut down a decade ago, the paper processing plant that had gone 3 years after that, the long blocks of dead storefronts and chain-link fencing and streetlights that had been reported broken so many times that the city had quietly stopped pretending to fix them. She walked through it. The rain didn't ease. If anything, it found its rhythm and settled into it the steady, hard drumming of a storm that had decided to stay a while. Her hoodie was soaked through in 4 minutes. Her jeans went heavy. Her sneakers started making that sucking sound against the pavement. Her hair plastered itself to the sides of her face, and she stopped pushing it back because there was no point. She passed houses with their curtains drawn and televisions glowing blue through the gaps. She passed a dog that barked once from behind a fence and then thought better of it. She passed a man getting into a truck in his driveway who looked at her for a long moment in the rain and then looked away because looking away was the easier thing to do, and most people in her experience chose the easier thing. She did not cry. She wanted to. She had been wanting to for approximately 2 years, which was how long Raymond Holt had been a permanent fixture in the house on Canfield Street. But somewhere in those 2 years, the part of her that cried had gone underground, had found some deep, quiet place, and locked the door from the inside, and now when she needed it most, it would not come back to the surface. What came back instead was her father's voice. He used to talk to her on rainy nights. Not nights this bad, but rainy nights when she was small and the thunder made the windows rattle, and she would pad down the hallway in her socks to find him still awake in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a book. He would close the book and pull out the chair beside him, and she would climb into it and wrap herself in the old cardigan he kept on the back of his chair, the gray one that smelled like sawdust and coffee, and something underneath both of those things that she could never name but would have recognized anywhere in the world. He used to say that the worst things in life were not storms. He used to say that the worst things were the days that looked fine on the outside and were quietly falling apart on the inside. He used to say you could survive a storm. You couldn't always survive the quiet rot. He had said a lot of things, her father. And then one February morning when she was 9 years old, the Oregon State Police had come to the door at 6 in the morning with their hats in their hands and their faces arranged into expressions of practiced sorrow. And they had told her mother that Everett Voss's pickup truck had gone off Route 9 at the bend near the Keswick River in a stretch of heavy fog where the guardrail had been damaged and never repaired. They said the truck had burned. They said there wasn't much left to recover. She remembered standing in the hallway in her pajamas, close enough to hear, but not close enough to be seen. She remembered the way her mother's hand had gone up to her mouth and stayed there. She remembered that her mother's knees did not give out. That had surprised her even at 9. In the movies, knees always gave out. Her mother just stood in the doorway and looked at the state troopers and looked at the gray February morning behind them, and then said thank you in a voice so flat it didn't sound like her mother at all. Calla had not understood that at 9 years old. She understood it better now. It didn't hurt less for the understanding. She walked for 40 minutes. Her phone died somewhere around the 20-minute mark. She didn't try to check it again. The town thinned around her. The houses got farther apart. The trees came in closer on both sides of the road, tall, dark Douglas firs, whose upper branches she couldn't see in the rain, just the thick, wet trunks sliding past her in the dark, like things that had been standing there long before the road existed and would be standing there long after it was gone. Then she came around a long curve in the old county road and saw the lights. They were blurred through the rain-smudged yellow against the black, and for a moment she didn't know what she was looking at. Then the shape resolved itself. A low cinder block building, two gas pumps out front under a rusted overhang, a hand-painted sign above the entrance, old enough that the letters had gone soft at the edges. Breck's Service and Supply. Most of the bulbs in the overhang were dead. One of the remaining ones flickered with the nervous, irregular pulse of a fluorescent tube that was somewhere in its final hours. The lot was empty of cars. Through the window of the office, a dim yellow light moved slowly, the way people move late at night when the shift is almost over and the world outside has gone quiet and there is no particular reason to hurry. Calla stopped at the edge of the lot. She stood there in the rain with water running down the back of her neck and assessed the situation the way her father had taught her to assess things. Slowly, without letting what she wanted to see get in the way of what was actually there. And then she saw the RV. It was parked at the far end of the lot behind the dumpsters, most of it lost in the shadow beyond the reach of the broken overhang lights. A motorhome from another decade entirely. 22 feet long, maybe a little more. The white paint had given up its ambitions somewhere around the early 2000s and was now a color that could only be described as the memory of white. Rust had worked its way up the lower panels like something slow and patient that had been at it for years and was not in any particular hurry to finish. One of the side windows had a crack running from the corner to the center that had been bridged with a careful strip of silver duct tape. The tires looked tired in a way that went beyond the physical. Taped to the driver's side door was a piece of torn cardboard. The writing on it was large and slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone whose hands had spent more years around wrenches than pens. For sale. Run sometimes. $10. Calla stared at it. Then she laughed. It came out of her like something she hadn't been expecting. One short, wet burst of sound that was not quite amusement and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. $10 for a motorhome, $10 for a roof, $10 for a door that locked from the inside, and walls that kept the rain out, and a floor that was hers and not his. She had $9. She walked toward the RV slowly, the way you approach something you're not entirely sure is real. She put her hand on the side panel. The metal was cold and wet and absolutely still under her palm. It didn't pull away from her. It didn't tell her to leave. It just stood there in the rain and let itself be touched patient in the way that large, old, overlooked things sometimes are. You find something that interests you. She turned. The man who had come around from behind the office was somewhere in his early 60s. Not tall, but built in the way that men get built when they spend 4 decades doing real physical work. The accumulated density of it settling into their shoulders and their forearms, and the way they plant their feet on the ground, as if the ground is something that has been negotiated with and found trustworthy. He had white hair under a faded green cap with a tractor company logo on the front, and a beard going gray at the edges, and eyes that were tired in the specific way of a man who has closed up a gas station alone every night for more years than he could easily count. He was wearing a canvas jacket that had been dark green a long time ago. Rain ran off the brim of his cap in a small, steady stream that fell in front of his face like a curtain he had long since stopped noticing. He looked at the RV. He looked at her. He looked at the backpack on her shoulder, at the state of her hoodie, at her sneakers, leaving wet prints on the asphalt. "How much do you have, miss?" She considered lying. The instinct was there, quick and reflexive. The survival instinct of someone who had learned that showing your hand too early cost you things. Then something about the way he asked it, the directness of it, the complete absence of judgment in his voice, made her reach into her pocket instead. 9. She held it out. A crumpled 5-3 singles 4 quarters. The complete financial inventory of her existence at this particular moment in her life, damp from her pocket and not especially impressive. He looked at the money. He looked at her face. Then he looked at the photograph. It had slipped halfway out of her front pocket sometime in the last mile. The corner of it was visible, getting wet at the edges, and the face in it was just barely visible in the yellow light of the lot. Her father's face. Younger than she remembered him in her day-to-day memory, the way photographs always preserve people at a specific moment the living brain had trouble holding. His hand on her shoulder, both of them squinting into the sun. The old man's eyes stopped on that photograph. They stayed there, not a glance, a genuine stop. The kind of pause a person makes when they've seen something they were not prepared to see, when recognition arrives before the mind has time to manage it or decide what to do with it. When he looked back up at Calla, his face had changed in some way she couldn't precisely name. Something had moved behind his eyes, something old and heavy and long-carried. "What's your name, Miss Calla?" "Calla what?" She hesitated for only a moment. "Voss. Calla Voss." The old man was quiet for a long time. The rain moved around them. The flickering bulb under the overhang made its nervous light. Somewhere out on Route 18, a logging truck downshifted on a grade, and the sound of it rolled through the dark like distant thunder. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. The way a man nods when something he has been waiting on for a very long time has finally arrived exactly the way he was told it would. "Silas Breck," he said. "This is my station." He looked at the RV. "And that is my motorhome." He paused. "9 will do." He held out his hand. She put the money in it, every last bit of it. The bills were wet. The coins were cold. He didn't count them. He folded them together and put them in the front pocket of his canvas jacket and reached into the other one and came out with a key ring. 2 keys, one large silver modern looking, one small and brass worn smooth at the edges with a small notch missing from the head, as if it had spent years being used in something that required more force than a standard lock. He held the keys in his open palm. He did not give them to her yet. "Miss Voss," he said, "there's something I need to tell you about this vehicle before I hand you these." She waited. "There is a door," he said, "at the back, end of the hallway past the bunk. Gray metal door, painted, locked." She didn't know what to say to that. "What's behind it?" He looked at the RV for a long moment. He worked his jaw in the way men do when they are searching for the exact shape of something true and finding that it doesn't have clean edges. "I don't know," he said. "You don't know." "No, miss." "You've owned this RV and you don't know what's behind a door in it." "That's right." "Why?" The rain moved around them both. He looked at the photograph still poking out of her pocket, wet at the edges, now her father's face starting to blur at the margin. "Because it was never my door to open," he said. "It was never my door to ask about. And it sure as hell wasn't going to be my door to open now." He looked at her steadily. "But it might be yours." She stared at him. "Mr. Breck." "Silas." "Silas, what is this RV?" He held out the keys. "This motorhome," he said, "has been parked in my lot for 8 years. I've kept the tires inflated. I've started the engine every 6 months to keep the seals from drying out. I've kept the water fresh in the cabinet over the stove. I put new bottles in there last week." He paused. "I have not in all that time opened the door at the back of that hallway." Something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the rain. "You put new water in there last week." "Yes, miss." "Why?" He didn't answer that. He just looked at her with those tired, careful eyes and held the keys out a little further. She took them. They were warm from his pocket, heavier than 2 keys had any right to be. He touched the brim of his cap. "The propane tank is full," he said. "The battery is weak, but it'll run the lights for a few hours. The water bottles are in the cabinet over the stove. Don't use the tank water, it's old." He paused. "You take care of yourself in there, Miss Voss." She looked at him for a moment. "Silas?" "Yes, miss." "Why is it the right person thing? How do you know I'm the right person?" He looked back at the road. at the rain running down the center line, at the dark beyond the lot where the trees started and the lights of the town had long since disappeared. He was quiet for long enough that she understood he was not going to answer that question. Not tonight. "Get some sleep, Miss Voss," he said. "Things answer themselves in the morning if you let them." He turned and walked back toward the office, slow and steady rain running off the back of his cap. At the door he stopped. He turned his head back once. In the dark and the wet, his face was just a pale oval under the brim of his cap. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just looked at her across the lot with those old, careful eyes. Then he went inside, and the bell above the door made one small, clean sound in the rain, and the door closed. Calla stood alone in the lot with the keys in her hand. She looked at the RV. The RV stood in the dark, in the wet, and looked back at her. She walked to the door. The silver key turned smooth and easy in the lock, the way a lock turns when it has been oiled recently and carefully by someone who intended it to open without resistance. The handle gave with a clean click. The door swung outward. She climbed in. The smell hit her first, old fabric and dust and the ghost of pine air freshener that had finished its work many years ago. Underneath all of it, something else. A smell she couldn't define, only feel. The smell of a space that had been maintained and preserved and waited in. The smell of something that had been kept ready. But it was dry. That was the second thing. Dry and still and quiet, and not cold in the way outside was cold. The rain drummed on the metal roof in a pattern that was almost rhythmic, almost deliberate, as if it too had agreed to provide cover for whatever was happening inside the small aluminum shell. She closed the door behind her. She locked it. The lock caught with a solid, satisfying sound that she felt in her chest. She stood in the small entryway and let her eyes adjust. The cabin was narrow, a driver's seat and a passenger seat up front, both cracked vinyl, both showing the particular patience of furniture that has not been sat in for years, but has not forgotten how. A little dinette, a fold-down table, two bench seats with faded plaid upholstery, a kitchenette with a two-burner stove and a small sink and a half-broken cabinet above it. A doorway to a bathroom not much larger than a closet. Past that, a short hallway, maybe 6 feet long, and at the end of the hallway, a door. Gray metal, painted flat, locked, just like he had said. She didn't go to it, not yet. She set her backpack on the dinette. She peeled the soaked hoodie off her shoulders and hung it over the back of the driver's seat to drip. In a drawer under the sink, she found a hand towel clean enough and she dried her face and her hair with it until the dripping stopped. She found the water bottles exactly where Silas had said they would be. 3 of them sealed the brand she recognized from the grocery store in town. She drank one slowly, standing in the kitchenette, and the water was cold and clean and tasted like nothing except cold and clean. And it was the best thing she had tasted in longer than she wanted to admit. She sat down at the dinette. She pulled the photograph out of her pocket. Her father's face looked up at her, a little wet at the edges. Now the denim jacket on her younger self, slightly water-stained along one side. The smiles were intact. The sun behind them was intact. The way his hand rested on her shoulder like it belonged there, like it had been resting there her whole life, and intended to go on resting there indefinitely, was intact. "Hey, Dad," she said. The rain kept working on the roof. "I bought a motorhome." She almost smiled. It felt strange on her face, the shape of it like a muscle she hadn't used in a while. "I bought a motorhome for $9 from an old man who said there's a locked door in it and he doesn't know what's behind it." She set the photograph on the table in front of her. "And the worst part is I believe him. I don't know why I believe him, but I do." She looked down the hallway at the gray door. "You used to tell me I never met a door I didn't want to open. You said it like it was going to get me in trouble one day." She looked back at the photograph. "I'm starting to think you were right about that." She didn't go to the door. Not tonight. Tonight she was tired in a way that went down past her bones to some softer place she didn't have a name for. Tonight she had been pushed out of a house by a man who had spent 3 years dismantling everything she recognized about her life. Tonight she had walked 40 minutes in the rain and bought a motorhome with her last $9. Tonight was enough. It was more than enough. The door could wait. She lay down on the bench seat and pulled the spare hoodie from her backpack and folded it under her head. She found a blanket in the overhead compartment, thick and smelling of cedar clean, in the way that things are clean when they have been stored with care by someone who understood that care was its own kind of message. She pulled it over herself. It was warm immediately, genuinely warm. For a long time, she lay in the dark and listened to the rain and the small creaks of the RV settling around her, like something old and patient getting comfortable for the night. The sound of it was almost like company. Sometime around midnight, she slept. She dreamed of her father. She did not remember the content of the dream when she surfaced from it, but she remembered the feeling of it. The particular feeling of being in a room with someone who knows something important and is trying to find the right words, and you are waiting. And the waiting is not unpleasant because the person you are waiting for is someone you trust completely. Morning came gray and slow and deliberate the way October mornings come in the Pacific Northwest, when the season has decided it is serious. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The world outside smelled like wet pine and cold asphalt, and the particular sharpness of an October morning that was not quite winter, but was no longer pretending to be fall. Calla sat up on the bench seat and pressed her palms against her eyes for a moment. Motor home. Silas Breck. $9. The gray door. She sat with the door in her mind for a moment. Then she set it aside the way you set aside a question you intend to answer, but not quite yet. She stood up and washed her face from a water bottle and braided her hair back tight and put on her least wrinkled shirt and zipped her hoodie over it. She put the photograph in the inside pocket of the hoodie against her chest, where she could feel the faint rectangular weight of it when she breathed. She left the backpack on the dinette. She took only the keys and stepped out into the gray morning. The station was already open. Silas was sitting on a folding metal chair just inside the open service bay, a thermos cup in one hand watching the road, the way men watch roads when they have spent long enough watching them that the watching has become something close to thought. He looked up when she came across the lot. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just nodded once. The nod you give someone whose face you know before you've been introduced. She nodded back and kept walking into town. Greystone Falls had been built for more people than lived in it now. The kind of town that had peaked somewhere in the 1980s and had been in a long, slow, dignified decline ever since the way small timber towns in Oregon tended to decline when the mills went quiet and the younger people went looking for work somewhere with more options. The storefronts on Main Street were a mix of the occupied and the hopeful windows, either full of merchandise or full of for-lease signs in the particular faded typeface of signs that had been hanging there long enough to become part of the landscape. The men who used to run the lumber equipment now sat on the bench in front of the hardware store in the mornings and drank coffee from paper cups and talked about the high school football team and the weather and the way things used to be, with the mix of fondness and resignation that characterizes men who have made their peace with the distance between those two things. Calla walked into 3 places looking for work. The hardware store didn't need anyone. The auto parts place on the corner said maybe in the spring, which was not nothing, but was also not today. The small grocery on the north end of Maine said they'd keep her number if she had a number, which she didn't because her phone was dead. The 4th place was a mechanic shop on the south side of town called Decker's, run by a man named Boyd Decker, who had grease worked so deep into the lines of his hands that it looked like part of him rather than something that had accumulated there, the mark of a man who had spent decades in close conversation with engines and made his peace with what that conversation left behind. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. He asked if she was 18. She told him the truth. He asked if she'd ever worked in a shop. She told him no. He asked if she was afraid of hard work. She told him no. He pointed to the back lot, an acre of dead grass and rusted metal and old tires and machine parts that hadn't moved in years. He said if she could make sense of it, by the end of the day, he'd give her $20 cash and not ask any more questions about why a 17-year-old girl was standing in his doorway at 8 in the morning looking for anything that paid. She worked 5 hours. She sorted tires into stacks by size. She dragged engine components into organized rows along the fence line. She cleared the dead grass from the drainage channel running along the south wall. She got a splinter in her left palm that she removed with her teeth. She got a blister on her right hand from the grip of a wheelbarrow. She got grease on her jeans and didn't care about the grease on her jeans. At 3 in the afternoon, Boyd Decker came out and stood in the lot with his arms crossed and looked at what she had done without saying anything for a full minute. He had the face of a man who did not give compliments easily and knew that people generally knew this about him. Then he pulled a folded 20 from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. "Saturday," he said. "Come back Saturday." She walked out of there with $20 in her pocket and something she couldn't quite name but recognized as the distant cousin of dignity. The feeling of having been tested and not found wanting. The diner on the middle block of Main Street was called Dorn's. It had been there long enough that the sign was part of the town's identity rather than its advertising the kind of painted tin that people stopped noticing as a sign and started accepting as a feature of the landscape. The window said "Home Cooking" in white letters that had been retouched in a slightly different shade of white at some point in the last decade. Calla pushed the door open. A small bell above it rang. The smell reached her before anything else. Coffee and bacon and warm bread and something sweet in the back of it apple. Or maybe peach, something baked that morning. The smell of a kitchen that took its work seriously and had been taking it seriously for a long time. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her early 60s, round-faced gray hair, pulled back tight, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a blue apron over a plaid shirt. Her hands were dusted with flour. She had the kind of face that communicated without words and without effort, that she had seen enough of life to not be surprised by most of it and had made her peace with what had surprised her. She looked at Calla. She took in the wet sneakers and the grease-stained jeans and the blister on her right hand, and the particular look that sits around the eyes of a young person who has spent the night somewhere they didn't expect to be that specific combination of alertness and exhaustion that belongs to people who have recently been required to adapt very quickly. "Sit down, honey," she said. Calla sat at the counter. The woman set a glass of water in front of her, then a cup of coffee with 2 creams already poured, then a plate, 3 pancakes, bacon, eggs, a biscuit on the side with butter going soft into it. Everything steaming. "I have $20, Calla said. The woman waved her hand like that was a perfectly foolish thing to say at a moment like this. "Eat first. We'll sort the rest out." "I can pay." "I know you can. Eat first." Calla ate. She ate slowly at first with the careful restraint of someone who was aware of being watched and didn't want to show how hungry she was. Then that restraint went away because the food was real and warm and immediate, and the restraint had served its purpose as long as it could, and she ate the way a person eats when they have not had a real meal in longer than they want to admit. The woman moved around the diner. She refilled coffee for a trucker at the far end. She rang up a bag of rolls for an older man on his way out. She wiped the counter with a rag in slow practice circles. She did not stare. She did not perform concern. She just occupied the space in the easy, unhurried way of a person who was exactly where they belonged and had been exactly where they belonged for a very long time. When the plate was empty, she came back and set down a slice of apple pie, a modest slice, on the house. "Why are you being kind to me?" Calla asked. The woman leaned on the counter with both forearms. "My name is Mabel Dorn. I've run this diner for 32 years. She looked at Calla with the direct, patient attention of a woman who had learned to see clearly and without flinching. "I have a rule. The world doesn't get to throw a person out twice on my watch." Calla didn't have anything to say to that. Mabel reached across the counter and touched the back of Calla's hand for just a moment, 2 fingers checking that she was real. "You staying somewhere safe, honey?" "I have a place." "Is it warm? It's dry? Is it yours?" "It is now." Mabel nodded slowly as if this were a better answer than she had expected, as if the particular precision of it told her something. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I open at 5. You come at 7. I'll feed you breakfast. If you want to wash dishes on weekends, I pay $12 an hour cash." Calla's throat closed up in a way that surprised her. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. Call me Mabel. Yes, Mabel. Mabel's smile was the smile of a woman who had been handing second chances across a diner counter for 3 decades and had not yet decided to stop and did not appear to be thinking about stopping. Calla paid $4 for the meal. They both understood that was not what it was worth. Neither of them said anything about the difference. She walked back through town with $16 in her pocket and the first warm meal she'd had in days settling into her bones in the strange, unfamiliar, almost frightening feeling that she might actually survive this. That survival was not just a possibility, but something she might have some control over. She passed the old men on the bench in front of the hardware store. She passed the gas station where Silas was now standing at the pump, filling up a logging truck, and they nodded at each other with the ease of two people who had arrived at a shared understanding without having to negotiate it. She climbed back into the RV and locked the door. She set the $20 on the dinette. She found a jar of peanut butter in the back of one of the cabinets half full, dated within the year. She ate 2 slices of bread from the small loaf Mabel had slipped into her bag on the way out without announcing it or making anything of it, just pressing the bag into her hands at the door, the way people press things into the hands of those who won't ask for them. Then she cleaned. She didn't plan to. She just started because cleaning was something she could control, and control was something she needed, and the RV deserved better than the dust and the years of still air that had accumulated in its corners. She wiped down the dinette. She emptied the cabinets one by one, shook them out, wiped them down, put things back in the order that made sense to her. She found a stack of old newspapers in the closet by the door, all dated years back. A working flashlight that still had battery in it, a first aid kit still factory sealed, a small box of wooden matches, a screwdriver with a rubber handle worn smooth from use. And then, in the back corner of the cabinet, above the stove behind a box of crackers that had become a kind of geological artifact, she found something that was not supposed to be ordinary. A metal box. Small, the size of a thick paperback. Gray like the door at the end of the hallway. Not rusted, just dusty in the specific way of something that has been carefully placed somewhere and then not touched for a very long time, pushed all the way into the corner behind everything else in the place where things go when someone needs them to be found by the right person and no one else. Calla pulled it out. The lid was stuck, not locked, just pressed down hard and held by years of pressure and temperature and the slow bonding of metal to metal. She worked at it with the screwdriver for 3 minutes. When it finally gave, it came open with a dry, clean pop, like the release of something that had been held under compression for a very long time. Inside, a stack of papers folded, tied with a length of plain brown twine. Neat, deliberate, the way a precise man folds documents when he needs them to survive and be findable. She sat at the dinette and untied the twine. The papers were old. Some were photocopies. Some were handwritten in a script she didn't recognize. Some had letterheads at the top from organizations she didn't know. Technical drawings, pages of numbers, references to projects with names that meant nothing to her, memos addressed to people she couldn't place. She flipped through them without understanding most of what she was looking at, until the third page. Near the top, in a neat row of small typed text in what appeared to be an employee personnel summary, was a name. Everett Voss. Calla went very still. The name sat on the page in plain black type and looked back at her. She read it twice, then 3 times, then 4. Then she turned the page because her hands had already decided to, and his name was on the next one too, and the one after that. Memo after memo, form after form, report after report, all of them carrying his name. Some with his signature in the margin, the signature she had spent years tracing on the backs of receipts and the corners of homework, because it was the only part of his handwriting she had had regular access to. She stopped on a page near the middle. A personnel summary, a small black and white photograph in the upper corner. Her father's face younger than the photograph in her pocket, a little sharper, the hair shorter but unmistakably him. The same jaw. the same way of holding the face that she had inherited without knowing she had inherited it. Underneath the photograph, a job title, Chief Systems Engineer, and beneath that in smaller type, Halcyon Defense Systems Incorporated, Restricted Access Division. Calla set the page down on the dinette table. Her father had been a mechanic. That was what she had been told for 8 years. That was what her mother had always said, what the brief newspaper obituary had said, the one she had read so many times she had it memorized. Everett Voss, age 38, mechanic, beloved father, beloved son. He had loved hunting and working with his hands and the Oregon coast in the fall. She looked at the page again, at the photograph, at the title beneath it, Chief Systems Engineer, Restricted Access Division. Her mother had lied. For 8 years her mother had lied. Not about whether he was dead, about who he was. She sat completely still at the dinette table while the afternoon light came through the cracked side window and moved slowly across the papers, and her father's face looked up at her from a life she had not known he was living. She thought about Raymond Holt's voice on the phone. Whatever you found, stop now. She stood up. She walked down the short hallway. The gray door was at the end of it, waiting the way it had been waiting since the moment she arrived. Flat gray paint, metal frame, locked. Patient in a way that objects were not supposed to be patient. She put her hand against it. The metal was cold, absolutely still. "Dad," she said quietly, "what did you do?" The door did not answer. She stood there with her hand flat against the cold paint for a long moment. Then she went back to the dinette. She picked up the papers and retied them with the twine and put them in the bottom of her backpack under the spare shirt and under the paperback book. She lifted the cushion of the bench seat and found the storage compartment underneath the shallow hidden one that RV manufacturers built into every spare inch, and she put the bundle inside beneath an old folded tarp and lowered the cushion back into place. She picked up her phone. She had charged it for 20 minutes at the outlet behind the counter at Dorn's while Mabel wasn't looking. Just enough. She dialed the house on Canfield Street. 4 rings. Raymond Holt answered. Not her mother. His voice was exactly what it always was. Calm, level, controlled. The voice of a man for whom composure was not an achievement, but a tool, something he reached for the way other men reach for a pen. Charlotte, he said, because he was the only person in her life who used her full name and used it like a reprimand. I want to talk to my mother. She's not available. Put her on the phone. She's resting. She's been upset since you left. Calla's jaw tightened. Put her on the phone, Raymond. There was a pause, and then without warning or transition, his voice dropped. Lower, quieter, the voice of a man who had moved to a part of the house where walls were between him and anyone who might be listening. Calla, first name now. Listen to me carefully. She listened. I don't know where you are. I don't need to know. You wanted to leave. You left. That is a closed chapter. Put my mother on. She will not speak to you. She will not see you. She will not write to you. A pause. I want to be very clear. Whatever you found, wherever you are, whatever you think you are going to do with it. Another pause longer, the pause of a man choosing his next words the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. Stop now, Calla, before something happens that cannot be fixed. The cold moved through her again. Whatever I found, she said. You said whatever I found. Silence. How do you know I found anything? More silence. Then Raymond Holt said the last thing he would ever say to her on a phone. The kind of accident that took your father, he said. It runs in families. The line went dead. Calla sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. She looked at the backpack on the floor, at the gray door at the end of the hallway, at the cracked window and the rain-wet lot outside, in the yellow glow of the service station, and the single rectangle of light from Silas Breck's office, moving slow in the dark. Raymond Holt knew there were papers. He knew because he had been looking for them. He had been looking for them for 8 years, and they had been sitting behind a box of fossilized crackers in a cabinet above the stove of a motorhome parked behind a gas station maintained and protected by a man named Silas Breck, who had not told a single person they were there. She set the phone down on the dinette. The door at the end of the hallway waited. She was not going to open it tonight. Tonight she needed to think. Tonight she needed to be still and let the pieces settle into whatever shape they were going to settle into. Tomorrow she would find out who else in this town had been keeping quiet about Everett Voss. She lay back on the bench seat and pulled the cedar blanket over her shoulders and looked at the metal ceiling of the motorhome while the rain began again on the roof above her lighter, now a soft and steady sound almost like breathing. She put her hand against the inside pocket of her hoodie and felt the photograph through the fabric. Her father's face, the denim jacket, the workbench, the sun. She had grown up believing he was a mechanic who had died on a foggy highway. She was beginning to understand that she had grown up not knowing her father at all. And somewhere behind a locked gray door at the end of a 6-foot hallway, he had left her the truth. She did not sleep well that night. She lay on the bench seat with the cedar blanket pulled to her chin and the backpack pressed against the wall behind her head, and she stared at the metal ceiling while the rain came and went in shifts above her. Light rain, heavy rain, silence, then rain again. The roof responded to each variation with a different register of sound, and she cataloged them all without meaning to because her mind would not stop moving. Raymond Holt's voice kept returning to her. Not the words exactly, but the precision of them. The way he had dropped his register when he moved away from wherever Lorene was in the house. The way he had said whatever you found, like a man confirming the existence of something he had been searching for and not discovering it for the first time. The way the call had ended cleanly without escalation. The way things end when a person has said exactly what they came to say. He had not been angry. That was the part she kept returning to. Angry would have been easier to understand. Angry meant she had surprised him. What she had heard instead was something closer to recalculation. A man adjusting his plans in light of new information. Around 3 in the morning, she sat up and pulled the bundle of papers from under the bench cushion and untied the twine and spread them across the dinette table and began to read them properly. Not skimming for her father's name, but reading each page the way he had written and organized them, which was carefully with the patience of an engineer who understood that the arrangement of information was itself a form of communication. Most of it was beyond her. She did not know what a vector integration module was. She did not know what bilateral signal masking meant in a guidance context. She did not know what the phrase autonomous terminal sequencing implied about the nature of the system being described, though something in the clinical flatness of the language made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't fully articulate. But she understood some things. She understood that her father had worked at Halcyon Defense Systems for at least 10 years, beginning sometime around 2006 when she was not yet 2 years old. She understood that he had risen quickly and steadily. Department lead by 2012, senior engineer by 2014, chief systems engineer on something called Project Irongate by early 2015. She understood from the dates on the documents that the project had begun as one thing and become something else over time. The early documents had the careful technical confidence of men who believed in what they were building. The later ones had something different in the margins. Her father's handwriting. Small, pressed, hard leaning slightly to the right in the way handwriting leans when the hand behind it is moving faster than it wants to. On one page near the top, this is not what we filed. On another lower down, CV approved the revision. No board disclosure. CV Conrad Vance. On a page toward the back of the stack, underlined once and circled in a single motion, foreign broker. Geneva contact. Not DOD. And on the second to last page in the bundle, something stopped her completely. It was not a technical document. It was a photograph printed on plain paper, the quality of something captured from a distance with a long lens, the edges slightly soft, the composition hasty. A man younger than she knew him standing on the front steps of a building she now recognized. The glass facade, the brushed steel lettering above the entrance. Halcyon Defense Systems Incorporated. The man was Raymond Holt. The date stamp in the lower corner read March 2008, 3 years before Raymond had appeared in their kitchen. 3 years before he had arrived in her mother's life, and 3 years before he had begun his slow, patient work of making himself indispensable. Her father had written one line in the margin beneath the photograph in his small, careful hand placed. Confirmed 2015. She sat with that for a long time, longer than she sat with anything else she had read that night. Raymond Holt had not found her mother by accident. He had been sent. He had been there from the beginning, watching reporting, keeping the people at Halcyon informed of whatever her mother knew or did not know, of whether the papers had ever surfaced, of whether anyone had ever gone looking. And for 8 years, the papers had been in a motorhome behind a gas station, and nobody had gone looking because a 9-year-old girl had grown up believing her father fixed cars for a living. On the last page in the bundle, printed in her father's hand in letters slightly larger than the rest, 1742 Cresswell Industrial Parkway, Greystone Falls, Oregon. She already knew that address. Creswell Industrial ran along the river on the north edge of town through the corporate corridor. She had ridden past it on the school bus for years without ever paying it particular attention. Glass buildings and landscaped lots, and a constant low hum of central air systems. Halcyon Defense Systems was in her town. It had been in her town for years. She rolled the papers back into the bundle and retied the twine, and put the bundle back in the storage compartment under the bench seat beneath the tarp, where it had waited this long and could wait a little longer. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep again. She was at Dorn's Diner at 7 in the morning, as Mabel had told her to be. Mabel was already behind the counter when she came through the door. The diner was mostly empty at that hour, just a trucker in the far booth working through a plate of eggs, and a man at the window with the local paper. Mabel looked up, took one look at Calla's face, and without a word set a mug on the counter and filled it and slid 2 creams across. Calla sat. She drank. She let the coffee do what coffee does to a person who has not slept. Mabel. Yes, honey. Can I ask you something? Mabel leaned on the counter with both forearms settled and unhurried. You can ask me anything. Do you know a company called Halcyon Defense Systems? Out on Cresswell Industrial. What happened in Mabel Dorn's face was small enough that most people would not have caught it. A fractional tightening at the corner of her mouth. A brief shift of her eyes toward the man at the window checking without appearing to check. He was reading about the high school football team. He was not listening. Mabel leaned in slightly. Why are you asking about them, honey? Because I think my father worked there, and I think they had something to do with how he died. Mabel was quiet for a moment that was longer than it needed to be if the answer was nothing. Then she pulled out the stool behind the counter and sat down on it. Slow. The way a woman sits when her knees have accumulated a certain number of years and the body has started asking permission before decisions are made. Your father, she said carefully. What was his name, sweetheart? Everett Voss. Mabel closed her eyes. Not for long. A second, maybe 2. Then she opened them, and they were wet at the corners in the way eyes get when a name arrives that the body already knows that the body has been holding and waiting on for years. Everett Voss, she said softly. I'll be. You knew him. He came in here every Tuesday morning for 9 years, honey. Black coffee and the breakfast special. Eggs over easy, not runny, not hard, exactly in between. And if you got it wrong, he would eat them anyway and never say a word. But you could tell from the way he looked at the plate. He used to save me the sports page from the booth before he left. He left a $5 tip on a $6 breakfast every single time. I told him once it was too much, and he told me there was no such thing as too much for a person who fed him right. She paused. He liked Tuesdays. He always said he liked Tuesdays. Something in Calla's chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. She pressed through it. Why didn't you say anything yesterday, when I came in? Because yesterday, sweetheart, I didn't know who you were. I just saw a girl who needed to eat. She reached across and put her hand over Calla's warm and flower-dusted. I know now. You have his eyes. Exactly his eyes. I should have seen it the moment you walked through the door. Calla looked down at the counter. She breathed in once slow through her nose and did not let whatever was rising in her chest reach her face. Not yet, not here. Mabel, what do you know about Halcyon? Mabel held her gaze for a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and produced a small notepad and a stub of pencil. She wrote something. She folded the paper twice and slid it across the counter with two fingers quiet and deliberate, like she was passing something in a room where it was better not to be seen. Eat your breakfast first, Mabel said. Then go see this man. His name is Harlan Weiss. He's an old newspaper man. Worked the regional beat out of Portland for 30 years, retired to a cabin out past the boat launch at Lawson Lake, lives alone. He'll be there. He's always there. She paused. Tell him Mabel Dorn sent you. Tell him it's about Everett. Calla unfolded the paper. A rural route number and a road name she recognized, the gravel track that ran along the south shore of Lawson Lake. Why are you helping me? Calla said. Mabel looked at her for a long moment. Because 9 years ago, your father came in here on a Tuesday morning and ordered coffee and didn't drink it. He sat in that corner booth and stared out the window for a long time. When I went over to check on him, he looked at me and he said, Mabel, I need you to remember a name for me. He told me the name. He said, if my daughter ever walks into your diner, I need you to give her that name. I asked him what was going on. He said, I need you to trust me that this matters. She folded her hands on the counter. I told him he was scaring me. He said, good. Then he paid his bill and he left. 2 months later, they told us his truck went off Route 9. The diner was quiet around them. The trucker in the back booth was finishing his eggs. The man at the window had moved on to the weather page. What was the name? Calla said. Conrad Vance, Mabel said. And the company he told me to remember was Halcyon Defense Systems. Calla sat with that for a moment. Her father had known something was coming, and he had known that if it came, he would not be able to reach her himself. So he had left a message with the safest person he could think of. A woman behind a counter in a small-town diner, the kind of person who listened to everyone and was remembered by almost no one. Nobody ever notices a woman behind a counter. That was exactly the kind of thing he would have said. She ate the breakfast Mabel set in front of her. She ate all of it. Then she stood, paid $4, accepted the paper bag Mabel pressed into her hands at the door without comment, and walked out into the gray October morning. Lawson Lake was 11 miles north of town. Calla did not have a car. She walked. The road curved north out of town and into the timber country, tall second-growth fir and hemlock, with the undergrowth gone brown and copper in the October light. She walked the last 2 miles on gravel with the paper bag from Mabel in one hand, and everything she now knew turning over and over in her mind. The cabin sat on a slight rise above the south shore of the lake. Small, cedar-shingled gray with age and weather smoke rising thin from the stovepipe in the roof. A porch with 2 wooden chairs and a split wood railing. A dog the color of dirty snow lying on the porch boards, who lifted his head as she came up the drive and watched her approach without getting up, making a judgment and finding her acceptable. A man sat in one of the chairs. Somewhere in his late 60s, lean, long-limbed, even-sitting white hair, cut short, face weathered in the precise way of someone who had spent decades standing outside in the weather taking notes. Half glasses on the end of his nose, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, a paperback book open in his lap. He looked up over the top of the half glasses when she stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. I'm looking for Harlan Weiss, she said. He closed the book without marking his place. You found him. My name is Calla Voss. Mabel Dorn sent me. Something shifted in his posture, not dramatically, just a small settling the way a man settles when something he has been half expecting for a long time finally arrives. Everett's girl, he said. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment, then gestured to the other chair. Mind the second step, he said. The board is soft. I've been meaning to replace it since spring and haven't gotten to it. She came up, stepping over the second board, and sat in the chair he'd indicated. The lake below was the color of pewter under the overcast sky. A loon called somewhere out past the reeds, a long descending note that the water carried and the trees absorbed. Harlan Weiss set the paperback on the porch railing. He looked at the lake for a moment. "How old are you?" he said. 17. "You look like him," he said. "The jaw, the way you stand." People used to say that. They were right to. He picked up a coffee cup from the porch floor beside his chair and drank from it. "Your father came to me in the spring of 2015. He said he had something. He said it was large. The kind of thing a man in my line of work spends a career hoping to be handed and usually isn't." He paused. "He worked with me for 14 months. Documents, sources, his own testimony. We had a story that was going to matter. The kind that doesn't just end careers, it ends institutions." "What happened?" He turned his head and looked at her directly over the top of the half glasses. "What I am about to tell you, Miss Voss, I have not said aloud to anyone since 2017. I want you to understand that before I say it." "I understand." He looked back at the lake. There was no body in that vehicle. The words landed on the porch air and stayed there. Calla did not speak. The fire at the Keswick Bend consumed the cab of the truck almost entirely. The medical examiner who signed the death certificate was a man named Aldrich Pruitt. He had been on a retainer arrangement with Halcyon Defense Systems since 2007. He listed cause of death as trauma and burn injuries consistent with the accident. No autopsy was requested. He paused. What was recovered from that truck was a wallet, a watch, and trace materials that were deemed, quote, consistent with human remains following a high-temperature fire event. "Consistent with," Calla said. Those were the precise words used. "Not confirmed. Not confirmed, no." The loon called again, closer now. "Then where was he?" she said. "Between August and February." "That is the question I have asked myself for 8 years. Harlan held the coffee cup in both hands without drinking from it. "My theory is that your father knew in August of 2016 that Conrad Vance was aware of what he had been doing. He knew it because someone told him. He knew that the people he was dealing with did not allow loose ends." He paused. "So he disappeared. He arranged it himself. He got out in August and began working on a different plan, something more direct, something that would survive even if he didn't." He set the cup down. "I believe he worked on that plan for 5 months, and I believe that sometime in late January of 2017, Conrad Vance's people found him. And I believe the truck on Route 9 was how they chose to close the file." Calla was quiet. The dog on the porch sighed in its sleep. "He gave himself up," she said, "so they would stop looking, so they would leave us alone." "That is what I believe happened. Yes." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. She breathed. She moved through it the way her father had once taught her to move through hard things, steadily, one step at a time. "He had a plan," she said. "You said he was working on a different plan. What kind of plan?" Harlan looked at her. "I don't know the specifics, but I know that a man like him who spent 10 years inside a company like Halcyon and came out with what he came out with does not disappear without leaving something behind." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Voss, where did you sleep last night?" "A motorhome. I bought it from a man at a gas station." Harlan Weiss went very still. "Which man?" "Silas Breck, out on Route 18. The silence on the porch was complete for a long moment. The lake was flat and gray below. The smoke from the stovepipe went straight up into the still air. "Miss Voss," Harlan said carefully, "is there a locked door in that motorhome?" Everything in her chest went quiet. "Yes," she said. Harlan Weiss put his half-glasses in his shirt pocket. He looked at the lake. He looked at her. He looked at his hands. "Silas Breck," he said slowly, "was your father's closest friend. They met at Oregon State in the late 90s. Breck dropped out senior year, came home, took over his father's station. Your father finished his degree and went on to Halcyon, but they stayed close. Breck came to your house for holidays. Your father took you fishing at Breck's family cabin when you were 4 years old. You wouldn't remember. I don't. After your father died, Breck pulled back from your family. Your mother had remarried. People said he had simply drifted the way people drift after a loss. He paused. I never believed that was the whole story. Calla stood up. I have to go talk to him. Sit down, Miss Voss. He's been sitting on that motorhome for 8 years. He's been... Sit down. She sat. Something in his voice had calibrated itself to the specific frequency of a person who needed to be slowed down before they made a mistake. You will go back, he said, but you will not run there. You will walk. You will think. You will not tell Silas Breck that you know who he was to your father. You will let him tell you. If he tells you, you will know the moment has come. If he does not, something is wrong, and you come back here before you do anything else. She thought about the water bottles, put in fresh last week. 8 years of tires inflated and engine turned over. A man tending something in secret, keeping a promise to someone who was no longer there to confirm it needed keeping. All right, she said. One more thing. Before you go. She waited. In those 14 months I worked with your father, he gave me a great deal of material. What he didn't give me because we ran out of time was the thing he called the capstone. He said it was the piece that tied everything together, the one thing that could not be explained away or litigated into ambiguity. He paused. I never found out what it was. He disappeared before he told me. You think it's in the motorhome. I think your father was not the kind of man who would leave a plan unfinished. I think he found a way to get the most important thing he had to somewhere safe, somewhere the right person could eventually find it. He looked at her steadily. I think you are the right person, Miss Voss. I believe he always knew you would be. She ate the sandwich Mabel had packed on the walk back. She didn't taste it. Her mind was moving through the architecture of what she now understood. Her father had been an engineer of weapon systems. He had discovered his CEO was selling those systems to unauthorized foreign buyers. He had tried to go through legitimate channels. When that became too dangerous, he had disappeared. He had spent 5 months building something more durable than a newspaper story. Then they had found him, and the thing he had built had waited in a motorhome behind a gas station for 8 years until his daughter was old enough and desperate enough and stubborn enough to walk through the rain with $9 in her pocket. Raymond Holt had been placed there. The photograph, March 2008. Placed, confirmed 2015. Her father had known. He had known, and he had not been able to tell her mother, and he had not been able to fight it from inside the house, and so he had made a plan that would outlast him. She walked past Decker's where Boyd lifted a hand at her from under a car without coming out. She kept walking north. Cresswell Industrial Parkway ran along the river with corporate construction on one side and water on the other. Halcyon Defense Systems occupied the third building on the left, a 5-story structure of dark glass with the company name cut from brushed steel above the entrance and cameras at every visible corner. The lot was full of cars that cost more than anything on Canfield Street. She stood across from it in the shadow of a closed coffee kiosk and watched. She watched for 2 hours. At 4:15, the flow from the front doors increased. The end of the business day, people in good coats moving toward the parking lot with phones in their hands. At 4:30, the doors opened and a single figure came out. A man, mid-40s, lean dark hair, cut short, a long charcoal overcoat. He walked with the unhurried authority of someone who had never had to think about whether he belonged somewhere. He stopped on the steps and looked at his phone. He put it in his pocket. He looked up at the sky at the low gray ceiling of cloud over the river. Then he looked across the street, not at her specifically, just the general survey of a man who had developed the habit of knowing what was in front of him. She was still in the shadow of the kiosk and had not moved and was not going to move. But she saw him. She saw the line of his jaw and the small, pale scar above his left eyebrow. She had seen that scar before, in the bundle of papers. 2 photographs, not one. She had not looked at the second one in years because looking at it had hurt in a way she had learned to manage by not looking. The second photograph was of her father standing in front of a building under construction. Hard hat under one arm, his other arm around the shoulders of a man the same age, both of them grinning into the camera with the uncomplicated confidence of two people who believed they were building something that would matter. The man on the steps of Halcyon Defense Systems was the man in that photograph. Conrad Vance, the name her father had left with Mabel Dorn, the name in the margins of the technical documents, the man whose initials appeared on every amended version of Project Iron Gate that her father had flagged, her father's friend, and the man who had arranged for him to die. Conrad Vance stood on the steps a moment longer. Then he walked down to a black car at the curb, got in, and was gone. Calla did not move for another full minute. Then she walked back through town to the station. Silas Breck had not moved from the service bay. He was exactly where she had left him that morning, the thermos cup balanced on his knee, now his eyes on the road with the particular patience of a man who had spent 8 years making peace with waiting. He looked up when she came across the lot. She walked all the way to the edge of the service bay. She stopped 6 feet from him. "You knew my father," she said. He looked at her for a long time with those tired, careful eyes. Then he nodded. "Yes, miss, I knew your father. You were his friend." "I was. And you've been sitting on this motor home for 8 years." "Yes, miss." "Waiting for me." "Yes, miss." "Why didn't you come find me?" He set the thermos cup on the floor beside his chair with the deliberate care of a man who wanted his hands free for what he was about to say. "Your father left me one set of instructions, Miss Voss. He gave them to me on a Friday evening in July of 2016. We sat right here in this bay and we drank a beer and he told me what he needed." He paused. "He said, Silas, if anything happens to me, 3 things. Keep the motor home running. Keep the door at the back locked and wait." "Wait for what?" I asked him that. The corner of his mouth moved. "He said I'd know. He said she'll come when she needs to, and I'll know her when I see her." "And you knew it was me. The moment you reached for that photograph in your pocket, miss. You have your daddy's way of holding on to things." Something in her chest pulled tight. "You could have told me last night." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Silas Breck was quiet for a moment. He looked at the oil-dark concrete of the service bay floor, and then he looked back at her. "Because he told me not to," he said. His exact words. He said, "Silas, when she comes, don't tell her. Let her find it. She's mine. She'll find it. And if she finds it herself, she'll trust it. If you put it in her hands, she'll always wonder whether she'd have gotten there on her own." He looked at her steadily. "He needed you to trust what you found. He needed it to come from you." Calla put both hands over her face. She stood there in the entrance to the service bay with the smell of motor oil and cold concrete around her, and the October night coming in behind her, and she let the 8-year weight of it move through her. The grief of discovering that the person you lost had not stopped thinking about you after they were gone. That the plan he had built in the dark alone in the last months of his life had been built around his knowledge of exactly who she was and exactly what she would do. When she could breathe normally again, she lowered her hands. "There's a man named Conrad Vance," she said. Silas's face went flat and hard in the way metal goes when the temperature drops. "I know that name. He killed my father. I have believed that since 2017, miss. My father left something in the motorhome." "Yes, miss." She looked at him. "I'm going to open that door tonight." He nodded once. "Yes, miss. I believe you are." She went to the toolbox by the lift and lifted the lid. The crowbar was there exactly as he had said it would be. Black steel, 2.5 feet of it, heavy and cold. She picked it up. She turned back to him. "Silas." "Miss Voss." "Why $9?" He was quiet for a moment. "How old were you when your father disappeared, miss?" "9. He set that price 8 years ago. When he gave me the motorhome, he said, 'Silas, when she comes, the price is 9, not 10, not 8. 9. He said she'll be the same girl she was when I left her underneath everything they put on top of her. And that's the girl I need to come through that door. Calla stood with the crowbar in her hand for a moment. I'll bring this back when I'm done, she said. I'll be here, Silas said. I'll be in this chair watching the road. If anybody comes who shouldn't be coming, I'll know before they reach the lot. You take all the time you need. She walked across the asphalt toward the motorhome. The station lights fell yellow on the pavement behind her. Her shadow went out long and thin in front of her, pointing straight at the door. She climbed in. She locked the door. She stood in the entryway for a moment with the crowbar in her right hand and let her breathing settle. Then she walked down the hallway. The gray door was at the end of it, exactly as it had always been. Flat gray paint, metal frame, locked. Patient in that way it had that objects were not supposed to have. She raised the crowbar. The first swing barely marked the surface. The metal gave back a flat, hard ring that traveled through the walls and out into the night, and her hands stung from the shock. She adjusted her grip. She thought about her father. She swung again. The second blow left a dent near the lock, a small warp in the painted surface, a chip of gray flaking free and floating to the floor. She set her feet wider apart and put her back into it the way her father had once shown her how to drive a nail, all your weight, all of it. Nothing held in reserve, the whole force of your body behind the point of impact. She did not count the swings. She was thinking about a man who had spent 5 months building something in secret that would outlast him, and she was making sure that every ounce of what she was feeling went into the steel. The lock cracked on the 17th blow. It cracked with a dry, clean sound smaller than she expected, like a knuckle being popped. The door shuddered. The mechanism inside gave way with a sound like a small gear stripping, and she put her palm flat against the surface and pushed. The door swung inward. Cold air came out to meet her. Not stale air, genuinely cold temperature-controlled cold, the kind that requires intention and maintenance, and the kind of care you take with things that cannot be replaced. She stepped through the door. The space was small, 4 feet wide, 6 feet deep, built into the rear of the motorhome where the spare tank housing would have been. The walls were lined with insulating foam, gray and dense. The floor was steel plate cold through her sneakers. A motion sensor light came on the moment she crossed the threshold. Clean white LED, a single fixture at the top center, illuminating everything at once with the flat, comprehensive light of a room that had been waiting to be seen. She stood still and took it in. 3 shelves ran along the back wall, and both side walls narrow and deep built from treated plywood and bolted directly to the frame. The shelves were full. 3-ring binders, a dozen of them, their spines labeled in her father's handwriting. A row of small metal cases the size of hardback books. A stack of unmarked manila folders secured with rubber bands. A row of audio cassette tapes in individual plastic sleeves, each one labeled with a date and a set of initials. A laptop computer, the model at least 10 years out of date, the charging cable coiled beside it with a precision that looked intentional. A small fireproof lockbox on the bottom shelf, the kind used for important documents with a 3-digit combination dial built into the lid. And on the wall, directly opposite the door at eye level, in a plain black frame, a photograph. Her, age 9, wearing the denim jacket 2 sizes too big, standing in front of a Christmas tree, holding up a drawing she had made, a crayon house with smoke coming from the chimney, and a sun in the corner with lines radiating out of it. She was grinning the way children grin when they are entirely sure of where they are and who they are with. Below the photograph, taped to the wall with 2 small strips of tape, carefully so as not to damage it, was a folded sheet of paper. Her name was written on the outside, in his handwriting. Calla. She crossed the small space in 2 steps. She took the paper from the wall with both hands and unfolded it. Charlotte, he had written, which was her full name, the one only he had ever used without it feeling formal. If you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry. I want you to know that I tried to find another way. She read it once through without stopping. Then she stood in the cold white light and read it again. He explained Project Iron Gate clearly and precisely the way he explained everything from the beginning, without assuming she knew what she didn't know. He explained what the system had been designed to do and what it had actually become. He explained Conrad Vance and the foreign buyers and the falsified filings with the Department of Defense. He explained the months he had spent with Harlan Weiss and the moment he had understood that Vance knew what he was doing. He explained that Raymond Holt had been placed in their lives deliberately, that he had suspected this since 2013 and confirmed it in 2015 when he found Holt's name in a vendor roster connected to a halcyon shell company, that he had not told Lorene because telling her would have endangered her, that he had made the choice to disappear because the house was being watched and the people watching it would not have hesitated. He explained the accident on Route 9. He wrote, "I will not be in that truck, Calla. I will be somewhere else by then. I am going to get far enough away to finish what I started, and then I am going to come back. I want you to believe that I intended to come back." Then he wrote, "In the lockbox on the bottom shelf, there is a digital audio recorder. There is one file on it. The date on the file is the day I made the recording. Take it to Harlan Weiss. He will know exactly what to do. He has been waiting for this for a long time." And at the bottom of the page, in letters pressed slightly harder into the paper, "I love you, Calla. I have loved you every day of your life. Every single day. Finish this, then live. That is the most important thing I am asking of you. Bring him down and then live your life. Your father, Everett." She folded the letter along its original creases. She put it in the inside pocket of her hoodie against her chest next to the photograph. Both of them there, father and daughter, in the same pocket. Then she knelt on the steel floor. The lockbox was on the bottom shelf exactly where he had said. Fireproof gray, a combination dial with 3 digits. She thought about it for exactly 1 second. Her age when he disappeared. 9. The number of children he had. 1. The year he had given the motorhome to Silas. 6. She turned the dials. The lock released. She opened the lid. Inside, on a bed of black cut foam fitted precisely to its dimensions, was a digital audio recorder. Small and black, the size of a deck of cards, the screen dark from years of waiting. A USB cable was coiled beside it. She pressed the power button and held it. The screen lit up pale blue. One file in the memory. A single file named with a date. February 3rd, 2017. The day before the state troopers had come to the door on Canfield Street. She looked at the play button for a long time. She did not press it. Her father had told her to take it to Harlan Weiss. She was going to honor that instruction. Not tonight. Tonight she needed to keep it safe. She closed the lid. She turned the combination. She carried the lockbox out of the compartment and set it on the dinette. She went back in. She made a survey of the remaining shelves. She found on the 3rd shelf a small white envelope with no name on it. Sealed. She opened it. A shorter letter dated 2 weeks before the long one. "Calla, there is one more thing I need you to know. Your mother does not know about any of this. About Iron Gate. About Vance. About what I did or where I went. I did not tell her. The less she knew, the safer she was. Raymond was watching everything. I want you to understand, I did not stop loving her. I disappeared because if I had stayed, she would have been hurt. When this is over, if she is safe, take care of her. She is going to need you. Your father." She put that letter in the same pocket as the first one. She left the compartment and went back out into the lot. Silas Breck had not moved from his chair. He was exactly where she had left him, the thermos cup resting now on the workbench beside him. His eyes steady on the road in the quiet way of a man who has been watching a particular road for a very long time and has learned to read it the way other men read books. He turned when she came across the pavement. He looked at her face. He looked at the lockbox in her hand. She walked up to him and put her free hand on his shoulder. His shoulder was solid and still under her palm. He looked at the road. "He told me to take care of you," she said. His hand came up and covered hers. His hand was rough and warm and completely steady. They stayed like that for a moment in the yellow light of the station, while the October night settled around them and the road ran dark in both directions, and the firs stood black against the sky. "You take care of yourself first, Miss Voss," he said, "and then you go finish what he started." "I will," she said. She went back inside the motorhome. She set the lockbox on the dinette next to her backpack. She lay down on the bench seat and pulled the cedar blanket over her shoulders and looked at the ceiling. No rain tonight, just the sound of the road in the distance and the wind in the firs, and somewhere far off a freight train on the old lumber line making its long, low call across the dark. She thought about her father's voice on a recorder she hadn't played yet. She closed her eyes and let the dark take her under. She was awake before the alarm she hadn't set. The freight train was gone. The wind had died. The world outside the motorhome was the particular kind of quiet that exists in the last darkness before dawn, the whole country holding its breath before the morning committed itself to anything. Calla lay on her back for a moment with her hand pressed flat against the inside pocket of her hoodie. Both letters. Both of them. She could feel them through the cotton, the slight crinkle of the paper, the weight of what was written on them. Then she sat up. She washed her face from a water bottle. She braided her hair back tight. She put on her cleanest shirt and zipped her hoodie over it. She picked up the lockbox. It was 5:50 in the morning when she stepped out of the motorhome. The lot was dark except for the single working light under the overhang. Silas's office was dark, but his truck was behind the service bay, which meant he was here sleeping in the back room the way she suspected he did most nights, close to the station, because the station was what he had. She did not wake him. She set out on foot through the dark town. Greystone Falls at 5 in the morning was a different place. The storefronts were dark. The bench in front of the hardware store was empty. The streetlights made pools of orange on the wet sidewalk, and the spaces between them were genuinely black, and she moved through both without slowing down the lockbox under one arm. Her footsteps the only sound on the main street for 3 blocks in either direction. She was at the gravel road to Lawson Lake by 6. She walked the last 2 miles in the gray pre-dawn light, the trees coming up dark on both sides, and the gravel pale beneath her feet. Harlan Weiss's cabin was lit when she came up the drive. One light in the window, warm and steady. Smoke from the stovepipe. The dog lifted his head when she was still 20 yards out and watched her come without making a sound, as if he had already decided she was expected, and there was nothing to announce. The door opened before she reached the steps. Harlan stood in the doorway in the same flannel shirt, half glasses already on his nose, a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked at her face. He looked at the lockbox under her arm. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. The cabin was small and warm and smelled of coffee and old paper and wood smoke. Bookshelves along every wall. A roll-top desk in the corner closed and locked. A kitchen table with 2 chairs. A wood stove along the far wall radiating dry, even heat. The kind of interior that communicated a life lived entirely in the mind, orderly and particular and deeply private. She set the lockbox on the kitchen table. She unlocked it. She lifted the lid. She took out the recorder and set it on the table between them. Harlan sat down across from her. He looked at the recorder for a long time without touching it. "You didn't play it," he said. It wasn't a question. "He told me to bring it to you." Harlan nodded slowly. "The date on the file," she said. "February 3rd, 2017. He looked at her. "The day before," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He set down his coffee mug. He looked at the recorder with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something for so long that the arrival of it requires a kind of adjustment, a resetting of the internal landscape. "I need to make a call," he said. He walked to the roll-top desk and unlocked it with a key from his shirt pocket. Inside, among the neat stacks of files and notebooks, was a cell phone that was not the phone she had seen him carry the day before. Older, plain, a phone that was not connected to anything unless he connected it. He turned it on. He waited for it to find its signal. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "It's Harlan," he said. His voice was level, unhurried. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment enough times that the real thing was only slightly different from the practice. The thing we talked about in 2019, it's here. I have it. He listened. No, today. I need you in Greystone Falls today. Another pause. Don't fly in. Drive. Bring 2 cars. I need you at the cabin before sundown. He listened a final time. Then yes, I'm certain. Drive safe. He ended the call. He put the phone back and closed the roll top and locked it. He turned back to Calla. That was a former colleague, he said. Federal Bureau of Investigation. She spent the last 6 years trying to build a case against Halcyon Defense Systems from the outside. She has been waiting on something like this since before she was supposed to retire. He came back to the table. She will be here by evening. Between now and then, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. All right. You are going to go back to Greystone Falls. You are not going to carry the recorder with you. It stays here. I am going to copy the file this morning, and by the time she arrives, there will be 3 copies in 3 locations, and there is no version of events in which this disappears. He looked at her steadily. You are going to work your normal shift at Dorn's Diner. You are going to wash dishes and drink coffee and behave exactly as a 17-year-old girl with nowhere to go and a new job would behave. Do you understand? Yes. If anyone approaches you between now and 6 this evening, anyone at all, a stranger, a man in good clothes, a car that slows beside you on the street, you go inside the nearest building with people in it, and you stay there until they are gone. I understand. He looked at her for a moment longer. Your father would be proud of what you've done in the last 48 hours, Miss Voss. She looked at the recorder on the table. He'd better be, she said. Those were the only 2 letters I'm ever going to get from him. Harlan Weiss smiled, a small, tight, genuine thing. Go, he said. 6 o'clock, not before. She went. She walked back down the gravel road and through the lightning morning into town. The sky had gone from black to deep gray to a pale washed-out blue by the time she reached Main Street. Dorn's Diner had its lights on and its door unlocked, and the smell of coffee and bacon coming through the glass. She pushed the door open. The bell rang. Mabel was behind the counter. She looked up, took in Calla's face the way she always did now reading it, the way a person reads weather, and then she poured a mug without being asked and set it on the counter. Calla sat. She drank the coffee. She did not tell Mabel anything. Mabel, for her part, did not ask. She simply moved around her diner in the early morning calm, setting up for the day with the ease of a woman who had been doing this long enough that every motion was its own muscle memory. Calla washed dishes. She had gotten good at it in 2 days. Stack, rinse, load, run. The steam from the machine was warm on her face. The clatter of plates and the hiss of the water and the low murmur of conversation from the dining room were things she could stand inside without thinking, and not thinking for a few hours was something she needed. She thought about her father on a February night in 2017, wherever he had been in whatever condition making a recording that he knew might be the last thing he ever said to anyone. She thought about the particular courage that required. To speak clearly and precisely when you knew the walls were closing and you would not get another chance. She went back inside and washed dishes until 2. At 2:15, she was wiping down the prep counter when the bell above the front door rang. She didn't look up immediately. The bell rang all day long. She had learned to stop registering it. Then Mabel's hands stopped moving. Calla looked up through the pass-through window between the kitchen and the dining room. A man had come in and seated himself at the counter. Third stool from the right, 3 positions from where Calla usually sat during breaks. He was removing his coat as she looked at him. Charcoal overcoat folded with the automatic precision of a man who had never in his life left a garment in a heap. Dark hair short. A posture that occupied the space around it with complete confidence. A small, pale scar above his left eyebrow. Conrad Vance. Calla set down the cloth she was holding. She stood absolutely still for a moment. Then she moved to the kitchen doorway and leaned in the frame with her arms crossed and watched. Mabel went to him. She turned over the mug at his place and poured coffee without any change in her expression or her pace. "Anything to eat, sir?" "Just the coffee, thank you." His voice was exactly what she had expected. Quiet, measured. The voice of a man who understood that authority didn't need volume. He turned the coffee mug in his hands. He looked at the window. He looked at Mabel's back as she moved away. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Calla through the pass-through window. "Miss Voss," he said. The diner went quiet in the particular way diners go quiet when something shifts in the room, and nobody can explain precisely what shifted. The trucker in the back booth kept eating, but slower. The older couple at the window table paused their conversation. Mabel at the far end of the counter did not turn around, but her shoulders changed. Calla came out of the kitchen. She walked around the counter to the front. She untied her apron and folded it over the back of the nearest stool. She stood 4 feet from Conrad Vance and looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at things, taking it in before reacting, not letting what she needed to see interfere with what was actually there. He was older than the photograph, the kind of man who aged well because his life was controlled and resourced and designed to prevent the kind of wear that ordinary living put on a person. He looked at her with an expression calibrated carefully to read as sad. "I apologize for coming to your workplace," he said. "I'll be brief." "5 minutes," Calla said. She walked to the corner booth. She sat with her back to the wall. He took the seat across from her, setting his coat across his knees, and she watched him arrange himself with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who never did anything without understanding exactly what it communicated. "My name is Conrad Vance," he said. "I'm the chief executive of Halcyon Defense Systems. Your father worked for me for 10 years. He was the best engineer I ever had. He was also my friend." She didn't respond to that. "I know the last few days have been difficult," he continued. "You've been displaced from your home and you're looking for something to hold on to. That is completely understandable. Your father in the last year of his life became convinced of certain things about our work that were not accurate. He took documents that didn't belong to him. He approached a journalist. He was preparing to make public accusations that would have been damaging and false. He kept his voice even and regretful, the voice of a man describing a tragedy rather than constructing a lie. His death was an accident, Miss Voss. I was devastated by it. I think about him regularly." She let that sit in the air between them for a moment. Then she said, "Why $9, Mr. Vance?" He blinked. Just once. A small, involuntary thing. "I'm sorry. The motorhome. The one I'm living in. My father set the price 8 years ago. $9, not 10. He told the man who kept it for him that the price was 9 because I was 9 years old when he disappeared. That was the girl he needed to come through the door." She kept her voice entirely level. "Did you know that?" Conrad Vance looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Something older and colder and significantly more honest than the carefully managed sadness he had walked in wearing. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he said. "I found the motorhome," she said. "I found the papers inside it. I found the compartment behind the gray door at the back of the hallway. I found the binders and the documents and the audio cassettes and the laptop." She watched his face. "I found the lockbox." He was perfectly still. "I found the recorder," she said. His jaw tightened by a fraction of a degree. "There is one file on it," she said. "It's dated February 3rd, 2017, the day before your people used my father's truck to close the story on Route 9. He recorded everything, Mr. Vance. He named you. He named the foreign buyers. He named the accounts and the amended filings and the falsified DOD submissions. He recorded it all in his own voice with the precision of a chief systems engineer who spent 10 years understanding the architecture of exactly what you built and sold." Conrad Vance did not move. "Whatever you think you have," he said, "is either fabricated or taken so far out of context that it cannot be used the way you imagine. Your father was a troubled man in the last months of his life. Anything he produced during that period—" "He left me 2 letters as well," Calla said. One of them explains everything about Project Irongate from the beginning. The other one explains Raymond Holt. That landed. She saw it land. A fractional contraction around his eyes there, and gone in less than a second. He knew about Raymond, she said. He confirmed it in 2015. He knew Raymond was placed there. He knew why. It's in the letter in his handwriting, in a compartment that only I could find, because only I would know the combination to the lockbox. She looked at him steadily. 916. My age, the number of children he had, and the year he gave the motorhome to Silas Breck. Conrad Vance sat across from her in the corner booth of Dorn's Diner and looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent his entire professional life being the most prepared person in any room he entered, and who was now arriving at the understanding that he had been outmaneuvered by a dead engineer and a 17-year-old girl in a worn-out hoodie. He reached inside his coat. He placed a long white envelope on the table between them. He set it down the way you set down something you want to be seen, but are not yet ready to insist on. There is a check inside that envelope, he said. It is made out to you, $2 million. It will clear at any bank in the state today. There are no conditions, no documents to sign. I am not asking you to hand anything over or confirm or agree to anything. I am your father's former friend, and I am offering a young woman in a difficult situation some help. That is all this is. Calla looked at the envelope. She sat with it. $2 million. She thought about what that could mean. A house for her mother. College. A future that didn't begin in a motorhome behind a gas station with $9. She thought about all the weight it could lift, all the doors it could open. Then she thought about her father in the dark in February of 2017 alone and running out of time making a recording because the recording was going to have to carry what he could not carry himself. She looked up from the envelope. He told me two things in those letters, she said. He told me to bring you down, and he told me to live my life afterward. She pushed the envelope back across the table toward him. I'm going to do both. Conrad Vance looked at the envelope. He looked at her face. For a moment, just one, the controlled surface of him came apart at the edges, and she saw what was underneath. The expression of a man who had built his entire understanding of how the world operated on the premise that every person had a number, a price, a point at which principle became negotiable, and who was confronting the fact that he had miscalculated this particular person entirely. Miss Voss, he said, you are 17 years old. You have no resources, no legal standing, no institutional protection. Whatever you think you are about to do, the people who benefit from it will not be you. The government will take the credit. The lawyers will take the money. You will be a footnote. My father was a footnote too, she said. He was a mechanic who died in a car accident. That's what his obituary said. She looked at him. He was fine with being a footnote. He just needed the truth to be somewhere it couldn't be erased. The bell above the diner door rang. Conrad Vance turned his head. Harlan Weiss came through the door, first moving with a deliberateness that was different from his usual unhurried pace. Behind him, a woman in her early 60s, gray hair cut short and practical, a navy windbreaker with no logo, plain dark clothes that fit well and carried themselves with the particular no-nonsense economy of someone who had never in her professional life needed a uniform to communicate her authority. Behind her, 4 people. 2 in plain clothes, 2 in dark blue jackets with 3 letters across the chest. The woman in the navy windbreaker walked directly to the corner booth. She looked down at Conrad Vance. Mr. Vance, she said, my name is Special Agent Lenora Graves, Federal Bureau of Investigation's Seattle Field Office. I have a warrant for your arrest. She placed a folded document on the table beside the untouched envelope. The charges include conspiracy to commit murder, unauthorized export of controlled defense technology to foreign nationals, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and falsification of federal procurement documents. She paused. Please stand up and place your hands on the table. Conrad Vance did not move immediately. He looked at the warrant. He looked at Calla. For just a moment, he was not a CEO. He was a man in a diner in a small town in Oregon, looking at the face of a 17-year-old girl who had found everything her dead father had left for her to find, and who had walked it straight into the hands of the one person who had been waiting long enough and was ready enough to use it. He understood what he had failed to understand. He had been looking for documents, for files, for physical materials his people had been searching for since 2017. He had not been looking for a plan. He had not understood that Everett Voss, in the last months of his life, had not been building a cache. He had been building a path, one that led from a $9 motorhome to a gray metal door to a lockbox, to a recorder, to a retired newspaperman, to a federal agent who had been waiting in Seattle for 6 years. He had not looked for the path because he had not believed a dead man could build one that worked. He stood up. He placed his hands flat on the table. The agents moved in from both sides. The cuffs went on with a clean practice sound, and one of the agents in plain clothes read him his rights in a low-level voice that had the rhythm of something said many thousands of times before. They walked him toward the door. The trucker in the back booth had stopped eating entirely and was watching with the fixed, slightly stunned attention of a man who had expected an ordinary Tuesday lunch. The older couple by the window watched. Mabel Dorn watched from behind the counter, one hand resting on the coffee pot, her face holding something large with the care of a person who had practiced holding large things with care. At the door, Conrad Vance stopped. The agent beside him did not stop him. He was not resisting. He turned his head back and looked at Cal across the length of the diner. She looked back. She did not look away. She did not lower her eyes. She sat in the corner booth where her father had probably sat on Tuesday mornings for 9 years, and she met Conrad Vance's gaze with the complete steadiness of a person who had nothing left to be afraid of from him. He turned away. They took him through the door, and the bell rang, and the door closed, and the black sedan at the curb moved out into the street, followed by the second vehicle, and the third car stayed at the curb with an agent inside and the engine running. The diner was completely quiet. Then Mabel put down the coffee pot. She came around the counter and walked to the corner booth and sat down beside Calla and put her arm around her shoulders without saying a word. Calla leaned into her. She was 17 years old, and she had been carrying something for the last 48 hours that she had not fully understood until this moment when it was no longer necessary to carry it. She put her head on Mabel Dorn's shoulder and she let it go. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, thorough release of a person who has been tightly wound for as long as they can remember and has finally been given permission to unwind. Harlan Weiss sat down across from them. He picked up the white envelope Conrad Vance had left on the table and folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket without a word. Agent Graves pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat at the end of the booth. She looked at Calla with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had conducted 10,000 interviews and knew that this one was different from all of them. "When you're ready," she said simply. They sat in the diner for 2 hours. Calla answered every question Agent Graves asked. She answered them clearly and completely, and without embellishment, exactly as her father would have answered them, with the precision of someone who understood that the truth was more effective than anything added to it. Harlan sat beside her through most of it, and occasionally confirmed a detail or clarified a date, but mostly he let her speak because it was her story to tell, and he had waited 8 years to hear someone tell it. Mabel kept the coffee coming, and the diner technically closed without ever locking the front door. When it was done, Graves shook Calla's hand. "The recorder is going to be central to the federal case," she said. "Everything else your father left is going to be necessary. This is going to take time, Miss Voss. Months, probably longer. There will be testimony required." "I know. You handled yourself with considerable clarity in there." "He taught me to," Calla said. "He just didn't know he was teaching me for this." Graves nodded once. She stood and put on her windbreaker and walked out into the afternoon. The night after Conrad Vance was arrested, Calla sat alone at the dinette of the motorhome and pressed play. His voice came out of the small speaker without warning. Calm and technical and completely unmistakably his, and she sat with her hands flat on the table and did not move for the 41 minutes it ran. He spoke clearly and without hesitation, laying out every detail of Project Iron Gate, every transaction, every falsified filing, every conversation with Conrad Vance, every name and account number and date that she had seen referenced in the documents, but not fully understood. He had thought of everything. He had left nothing ambiguous. When it was over, she sat in the silence for a long time. Then she pressed stop. She did not play it again. Once was enough. She had heard everything he needed her to hear. What followed was not a single moment, but a long series of them. The federal warrant on Halcyon Defense Systems was executed the following morning. Investigators and agents moved into the building on Cresswell Industrial Parkway with boxes and laptops and the organized, methodical energy of people who had been preparing for a specific operation and were finally running it. The dark glass building that had hummed quietly behind its security gate for years was suddenly irreversibly open. The two foreign brokers were identified within a week. One was arrested at an airport in Geneva. The other was taken into custody in Seoul with the cooperation of the Korean National Police. Three senior executives at Halcyon Defense entered plea negotiations within the month. The Department of Defense issued a statement that was careful and bloodless in the way of institutions protecting themselves while appearing to do the opposite. Raymond Holt was identified through financial records subpoenaed in the first week. 11 years of payments from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands traced back without difficulty to a subsidiary that ultimately connected to a Halcyon financial entity that had been operating under a different name since 2009. Investigators came to the house on Canfield Street on a Thursday morning. Raymond Holt sat down with federal attorneys the following Monday. He took a plea. He did not fight it. He was not the kind of man who fought when the numbers were not in his favor. He accepted 14 months in an agreement to cooperate, the choice of a man who had always understood that loyalty was a tool rather than a value, and tools were only useful as long as the structure they were part of was standing. When he came out 14 months later, he did not come back to Greystone Falls. Lorene Voss received a call from a federal investigator on a Thursday morning in November. She listened to what the investigator told her. She was quiet for a very long time after the call. Then she went to the filing cabinet in the second bedroom that had been Calla's room, the room she had kept exactly as it was, because something in her had never accepted the finality of the morning her daughter had walked out into the rain, and she took out the documents Raymond had given her to sign years ago when they had consolidated their finances, and she read them all the way through for the first time. She signed the divorce papers before the week was out. She went to the county clerk the following Monday and filed the paperwork to have her name changed back. Lorene Voss, the name she had been born with, the name she had given her daughter, the name that had belonged to both of them before the house on Canfield Street became something else. On a Tuesday morning in early March, the bell above the door of Dorn's Diner rang at 8:15. Calla was behind the counter. She had moved from washing dishes to working the counter 3 weeks ago, which Mabel had presented not as a promotion, but as a practical adjustment, as if the change had always been inevitable, and she was simply acknowledging what was already true. She was wiping down the prep station when she heard the bell. She looked up. Her mother stood in the doorway. She had lost some weight. Her face was different in a way that was hard to name precisely, as if something that had been sitting on top of it for years had been removed, and what was underneath was something older and quieter and more genuine. She was wearing a coat Calla had never seen before, which meant she had bought it for herself and not been given it by someone who wanted to choose what she wore. She was holding a small paper bag in both hands, holding it the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. The two of them looked at each other across the diner. Calla set down the cloth. She came around the counter. She crossed the diner floor. Lorene put the paper bag down on the nearest table and held out her arms, and Calla walked into them, and her mother's arms went around her and pulled her in close. And for a long time they stood in the doorway of the diner like that. Her mother cried into her hair. Calla cried into her mother's shoulder. They were both doing it quietly, the way women in their family did most things, without making a production of it, just doing what needed to be done. Mabel Dorn stood in the kitchen doorway with one hand over her mouth and the other pressed flat against her chest, watching, and she stayed exactly where she was because this was not a moment that required anything from her except witness. The bell above the door swayed once in the cold air that had come in with Lorene and then went still. In May, on a Wednesday morning when the spring had finally made up its mind about arriving, Silas Breck sat down at his kitchen table with a pen and signed his name to a piece of paper. Calla sat across from him. The document was a title transfer, one 1988 motorhome vehicle identification number printed in the relevant field transferring ownership from Silas Breck to Calla Voss of Greystone Falls, Oregon. No consideration listed in the purchase price field except the number that had been there from the beginning, $9. He signed it and slid it across to her. She signed it and slid it back. Then she took out the small box she had brought wrapped in a piece of brown paper and set it on the table between them. He looked at it. He did not pick it up. "Go ahead," she said. He opened it. Inside on a piece of folded cloth was a watch. Plain metal banded, a simple analog face with no ornamentation. The kind of watch a man buys when he values function over appearance and does not feel the need to signal anything to anyone about what he can afford. The crystal was unscratched. It had been kept carefully in the foam of the lockbox in a compartment behind a gray door, protected against time the same way everything else in that compartment had been protected against time. Silas held it in his open palm. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't wind it. He didn't put it on. He just held it the way you hold something you have been missing for years and are not ready to do anything with, yet except confirm that it is real and that you are really holding it. "He wanted you to have it," Calla said. "I know," Silas said. "He put it in there himself." "I know." He closed his fingers around it. "I'll wear it on Tuesdays," he said. She looked at him. "He liked Tuesdays," Silas said. "He always said Tuesdays were the best day of the week. I never could get him to explain why." On a Saturday morning in June, Calla drove the motor home out of Breck's service and supply lot for the last time. The new tires Silas had put on in April hummed evenly on the highway, a clean and steady sound that was entirely different from the tired, uncertain sound the old ones had made. The engine turned over smooth and without complaint. The cracked side window had been replaced with a new pane clear and tight in its frame. The gray door at the end of the hallway had been removed entirely, its hinges unbolted, the door itself taken out and set aside. The compartment behind it was clean and empty now, the shelves bare, the foam linings still on the walls. All the documents and the recorder and the cassette tapes and the laptop had gone to the federal investigators in January, logged into evidence entered into the record of a case that would take another year to fully prosecute, but was already by every measure that mattered decided. The compartment did not need to be hidden anymore. Nothing about her life needed to be hidden anymore. Lorene sat in the passenger seat with her seatbelt on and her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the road the way people look at roads when they are thinking about more than the road. The town of Greystone Falls passed behind them. The coffee kiosk and the hardware store and the men on the bench in the front window of Dorn's diner, where Mabel had already turned the sign to open and was probably at this moment pouring coffee for the first customer of the morning without being asked, the way she did every morning, the way she had done every morning for 32 years. The station where Silas was almost certainly settled in the service bay, not watching them go because he didn't need to watch them go. He had already said what he needed to say. He already knew what came next. The highway opened up past the edge of town, and the tree line came in close on both sides, and then fell away as the road climbed the first long grade toward the pass. And suddenly the whole eastern sky was in front of them, wide and pale and blue, and going on for what felt like the rest of the world. The Cascade Range rose ahead in the morning light, sharp white peaks against a sky that had finally, after weeks of gray, made good on the promise of something better. Lorene looked at it for a long time, then she looked at her daughter. "Where are we going?" she said. Calla kept both hands on the wheel. She thought about her father. She thought about a man who had spent the last 5 months of his life building something in the dark alone, knowing what he was risking and doing it anyway, not because he was certain it would work, but because he was certain that his daughter would be the kind of person who could carry it forward if it came to that. He had built his plan around his knowledge of exactly who she was. She thought about the watch in Silas Breck's hand. She thought about the recording, his voice coming out of the small speaker in the dark, calm and precise, and absolutely determined, saying everything he needed to say in the time he had left to say it. She thought about the letter. Bring him down and then live. That is the most important thing I am asking of you. She had done the first part. Before she had locked up the motorhome for the last time that morning, she had gone back into the empty compartment one final time. She had run her hand along the bottom shelf the way her father had once taught her to check a surface. Flat palm, slow and thorough, nothing missed. Her fingers had caught on something under the foam liner. A corner. She had lifted the foam. A small envelope, white unsealed, lying flat against the steel floor. Inside was a single-dollar bill, old and soft, from handling worn at the folds, as if it had been carried for years before being placed here. She turned it over. On the back in his handwriting, small and certain, for the girl who was always worth more than 9. Dad. Behind the bill folded once a photograph she had never seen. Her father holding an infant against his chest, both of them looking directly into the camera. The baby's eyes were open and already had the look of someone paying close attention. Her eyes. Already in the first weeks of her life, her father's eyes looking back at him from his daughter's face. She had sat on the steel floor of the empty compartment for a long time. Then she had put it in her pocket with the letters in the other photograph, and she had stood up and she had not looked back at the bare walls, and she had walked out into the June morning and climbed into the driver's seat of the motorhome and started the engine and waited for her mother. Somewhere he would have liked, she said. Lorene looked back out at the mountains. He would have liked anywhere with us in it, she said. Calla thought about that. She thought about a man kneeling beside a workbench in a denim jacket, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, both of them squinting into the afternoon sun. She thought about a man drinking black coffee in a corner booth on a Tuesday morning, saving the sports page for the woman behind the counter. She thought about a man sitting in a service bay on a Friday evening in July, with his best friend drinking a beer and giving instructions he had no way of knowing would take 8 years to execute, trusting entirely in the person he knew his daughter would become. She thought about all the ways a person could be present in a life, even after they were gone, if they had thought carefully enough and loved deliberately enough about what they were leaving behind. She put her foot on the gas. The motorhome hummed beneath them, and the mountains rose ahead, and the road ran east into a morning that was as clear and bright and open as any morning she could remember. And she drove with her mother beside her into all of it, into whatever came next, into the life her father had asked her to live. And she drove with both hands steady on the wheel and her eyes on the road ahead, and the mountains got closer and the sky got bigger, and the day opened up around them like something that had been waiting a long time to begin.